Hey, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be in the world today. Welcome to this week's episode of Endegroat's The Prism. It's a live webcast with a lot of variety. We basically talk about the multiple facets of leadership, and the topic changes week to week. So, thank you for joining us. Today, we want to talk a little bit about adaptive and agile leadership. And we're a executive search firm, a recruiting firm by nature, and we get to talk to clients and candidates every day. And we're really on the front lines of those trends. We get to see how our client views are shifting in terms of the type of candidates they're searching out, what they're adding to that list of critical attributes for a candidate and how they're even prioritizing that list. And we also get to see the diversity of candidates that are coming in the door and how they're evolving their skills and how they're developing themselves to prepare themselves to be more future proof in terms of where the world's going from a talent standpoint. So, we'd like to start talking about that a little bit, and then we can end the show with some fun topics with our newly crowned leadership roulette game that we like to play. So, what do you guys think? You talk to a lot of clients every day, and we've got Vera from Europe, and we represent the United States here, and clients ramp up their talent acquisition again. We're starting to see things get almost back to the levels they were pre-COVID. And how do you think that their optics have changed? How do you think that their priority stack has changed in terms of the type of candidates they're looking for from an agile and adaptive standpoint? Any views on that?
I will start, Mike, if you don't mind, with respect to adaptive and agile leadership. So it's definitely a trend, and I think this trend it emerged long before the COVID situation. So it's not something which emerged as a response to the situation, but it was actually more related to these transformation processes and digital disruption which started before. So it's a very dynamic concept, which again pushes us as executive search advisors to look at executive search processes also in a very dynamic way, because essentially clients and companies they are looking for leaders that would be able to quickly respond and adapt to changing circumstances, to unforeseen situations, to quickly reorganize their internal teams, to reorganize the processes. So basically, it really makes us prioritize personal profile and leadership styles rather than technical competencies, because in this environment, things can change so drastically. And this is what we see right now with the COVID-19 situation, that essentially the same leader who's coming from a specific sector with a specific background, he will have to shift his technical competences, because the environment is changing, and the consumer behavior is changing. Company has to quickly readapt and to start looking for new ways to generate profit, to generate margins, to respond to their customers. So it comes down to essentially to a personal profile of a leader, of his capacity to transform, to adapt, to communicate it to his team, and again work in a more dynamic way. So it's definitely something which is very relevant nowadays. It's a topic which we have been discussing with clients, and right now with new processes which are entering. So of course, the whole focus of job descriptions and position specifications really changes to these specific leadership traits, because the situation of uncertainty, essentially it has to be seen as something which will generate opportunities rather than risks, and this is the only way to do it.
So, digging deeper, can we effectively help our clients determine whether a candidate has great adaptability and agility skills, and through assessments or personal interviews? Do we think we can effectively do that today if we ramp to that point?
Absolutely, absolutely. And for this specific reason, with the global team, we have implemented some processes and recreated the entire process of assessing and evaluating candidates in a way that it really gives you a 360 perspective from the point of view of technical skills, soft skills, and development potential, in a way that you can actually project candidate and his development skills to the company strategy and the way it will evolve in the future. So again, for us, it's also a dynamic process, which of course prioritizes soft skills and using different tools and platforms and alignment models, helping us to define those future leaders that companies might need, no matter what happens, in the external environment and in the future. I'll maybe ask Jim to add more on this because he's a specialist in executive assessments and.
So all our work looking towards the future has kind of paid off, and we have social anthropologists on our team. We have clinical psychologists on our team, and we've done an incredible amount of work with assessments and basically looking at total fit of a candidate. And people used to wonder why a couple of years ago we needed clinical psychologists or social anthropologists, and we look at some of the shifting of requirements today, we kind of see why, where clients are getting deeper and deeper into the total fit of any given candidate, and it goes beyond just broad leadership skills and culture fit and the ability to run a team and being an expert in someone's domain. It's a lot deeper than that today. And I think agility and the ability to transform oneself and the ability to use that pivot word again, the ability to pivot very quickly and seamlessly is an incredibly important skill as we move forward here. Any other comments, Joe, Jim?
Yeah, I would just like to add, if we bring back kind of the purpose of why we do something like a personality assessment or looking at somebody's personal motivators or even their cognitive abilities, if you think of things like a pyramid, leadership behavior is the tip of the pyramid. That's what everybody sees, right? But in order for us to understand where somebody's behaviors are, you got to go below the waterline. And that's what these assessments, part of this assessment process, by doing a personality assessment, really starts to pay off, to look for a lot of the potential behaviors that Vera was just referring to, right? A good example is someone's level of openness. So there's a personality trait that we all have on how open are we? How open are we when it comes to levels of curiosity, right? Are you a very curious person? Are you inquisitive? Are you always pulling the string? Or are you someone that is very just set in their way, very content in who you are, and also the processes around you? So when Vera was saying, like, on the global trends, we're starting to look for these agility traits. We're starting to look for people that not only is based on their skill sets, but from their behavioral traits, what kind of leader are we looking for? This is one example of where you'd want someone that has a very open, inquisitive characteristic to their personality. Always curious, always wanting to know, how did we get here? Why did we do these things? What was the root cause of this? What was our history? When you have people that have that inquisitive mindset, that leads, Mike, to your point about, is there a real need for agility? At least they have those traits to be very agile instead of being stuck. And we can kind of peek into that a little bit through personality assessments and see, at least within them, their instinct is to be very curious. And with curious is a growth mindset, is an agile mindset, and always wanting to be able to shift.
So how do you add things like resiliency and basically the ability to handle stress into that mix? I had somebody work for me in the past who was an absolute rock star, but when stress reached maximum levels, this particular person got insomnia, and on about the third night, their personality dramatically changed. Where the sleep deprivation, just, you could tell they'd come to work and you could tell they weren't sleeping and they weren't the same person. And stress kind of triggered the insomnia, and the insomnia triggered some negative personality traits in that person, even though they were a rock star in the steady state. And so how do you put that in? I love the angle of measuring somebody's creativity and innovation.
Yep.
But particularly in a virtual world today, how can we tell how well people manage stress and handle stress?
Yeah, stress is actually, one of the assessments that we do is called the Big Five, and you look at 5 of the primary personality traits that's inherent into all human beings. And this level of openness is one that I just described, but another one is your stress tolerance, need for stability, and where inherently are you? And so the person that you described, they're a reactive type person. They will receive the stress in, they won't internally, instinctively be able to process that well. That's why the sleepless nights. and then they kind of lash out in one way or another, even if it's played out in their own head, and that's why they're getting the sleep deprivation and all that. We can talk about that on the resiliency side too. Whereas you look for a leader that may have high curiosity and high tolerance for stress and resilience. It's connecting all these dots to kind of have a well-rounded person. And those human beings are out there, and they're more often than not, but it helps to have these discoveries. It also helps that if you have someone on that team like that, to look for an exact opposite, or a yin to a yang, as someone that has a devil advocacy to it, someone that may not do well in stress but highly inquisitive. You'd want to look for somebody that is very well in stress but maybe a little bit more cautious in their terms, and they complement each other. So when you talk into teaming aspects, that you could look for both of those things. But it is amazing, Mike, that you saw firsthand about what sleep does and sleep deprivation does for a highly seasoned senior executive, that even these small amount of things of small stressors end up leading into 2 or 3 sleepless nights, and is the sleep deprivation that really degrades their ability to think.
Yeah, makes sense. And this all kind of fits in. And end of growth, we always strive for a total fit for our clients. And not just looking for fit, we're looking for that total fit. Every single dimension we can possibly measure and assess, we do. And I think that's a very dynamic statement, because the concept of total fit constantly evolves. And if we had looked at the requirements of total fit 9 months ago, it'd be very different than what we're going to be looking for in terms of total fit for the rest of this summer and as we push through COVID and come out the other side. So we got to be adaptable and agile ourselves to keep up with our clients and be able to continue to put that total fit package together for them. Joe, what are you seeing when you talk to clients? What are you seeing from a trend standpoint in terms of what they're asking for from a baseline talent, and even any did you see anything that's like moving up to the top of the list that may have been number 4 or 5 before, that's now floating up into the top 3 from an attribute standpoint?
I can't say I've seen much different than what Via or Jim have shared, other than the fact of the leaders now need to be much more hands-on. In other words, in the previous world before COVID, when you don't have to work remote, you have your assistant, or you have somebody close to you who can do certain things that you may not want to do, or that maybe it's just you don't have the time to do. But now leaders have to be able to do a few things from a technological standpoint. One is Zoom or whatever it may be. And some folks that before just they had their IT person set it up for them and then they would do it. Now they're at home, they have to be able to do it. So my point is from a technological standpoint, folks in leadership roles had to be way more in tune with technology, way more in tune with from a leadership standpoint, this new generation of folks who are really, I would say, fixated on work from home. This is before COVID even. There's the millennials have this, they have a mentality of they like the idea of work from home, and I think that COVID is proving, I think their point actually correctly, which is you can work from home and still be very productive. Mm-hmm. The old school mentalities of you have to be in the office every day, I think that's going to the wayside, and I think companies are starting to realize that and seeing that, but some old school leaders don't like the idea, and I think they have to be very pliable in what they're thinking is there. But aside from that, I haven't heard anything differently than what Jim and Vera have shared. But you know what? I wanted to bring up an interesting topic which hasn't come up in conversation because I don't think it can legally. But I would think a concern would be the health of a leader. In other words, is this person, to Jim's point, mentally healthy? Are they able to meditate? Are they able to do certain things that they can get them through the stressful times? Also, if there's someone who's physically fit, so to speak, maybe that gives them the ability to be able to get into an office when needed, and they won't have the stress of worrying about getting too close or having one-on-ones or having meetings. I'm just wondering, is that a concern for companies? And it's a legitimate concern. It's not something that they can ask, or nor can we. But I think it's just something that's probably sitting in the resonating in people's heads right now. I
think it'll be a bigger concern the longer COVID drags out in the U.S. And
Yeah.
a few weeks ago, before Florida and Texas exploded, there was a lot of talk about office buildings reopening at 50% capacity and what that new normal would look like, and that's kind of got derailed a little bit with this explosion of cases. But some of the things you're talking about are a little bit under the covers. So I can look at this and look at archetypes of leaders, and some leaders are change adverse. They're very conservative. That's the way they lead. That's the way they've been successful till now. Others are kind of change accepting. If change happens, they roll with the punches. They're adaptable. And then you have other leaders that are very change inviting, which leads into that innovation space. If I take what you just said about leaders also needing to be good at technology now, that leads me into the whole concept of, leaders can be digitally literate. They can understand digital technology and they can get on Zoom and do what we're doing. They can be digitally competent, where they can actually bring in new tools and use it. And then they can flip the bit and be digitally innovative. So if you get a leader who's incredibly good at adaptability and agility, they have that underlying change inviting mindset, they're digitally innovative, and they can handle stress, now you're getting pretty close to that total fit that we're talking about. So I think it's a great combination to start making the stack that way and start doing assessments that way. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think, Joe, to your point, it's an interesting thing that you can have someone check all the boxes, but still not be ready for the job. Yeah. And I think that's what you're getting after, and Devera's point too about how we've got to start maybe switching from a leadership point of view on their subject matter expertise to just being that holistic person. All of this conversation makes sense, right? And you kind of get to the point where you're talking to organizations about, in order to make yourself a high-performing organization, you have to start embracing these levels of resiliency. You do have to start talking about them. But it's an interesting concept, Joe. Do we start bringing it in from a talent acquisition point of view before they even get to the organization? Because it seems like it's always a little more correct to talk about it once they're in the seat, right? Once they're in the seat, you can have these conversations about your mental, physical, social, spiritual health pillars. But before they're in the seat and rate them that way, yeah, that's a little controversial. But yeah. I believe that this is probably a valid point to start to bring to organizations to say this is where a person sits in their level of resiliency, along with everything else that's assessed throughout them. Because the realities are, if you're a person that's a constant insomniac, you already are at least 10% subpar of every one of your peers, always, because you're in that constant state of zombieism. It's a proven fact. So it's a great point, Joe, that maybe we should. It'd be interesting to know people that are watching out there what their true opinions are and kind of what is the our ability to push test that a little bit.
So we have Dr. Jacqueline R.J. on the webcast with us again today, and so glad to have you back again. I think they've been with us for every single webcast so far. So #1 fan, thank you. Appreciate it that you joined us again, and you always have some great comments. So I think you're right, Joe and Jim, and it's going to become an obligation of people like us that are in the talent business to go out and to be able to get deeper and deeper assessments on the clients, on the candidates we're presenting to our clients. And I think the expectations of what we can bring to the table are going to start to grow. And like I said, that concept of total fit versus best fit, that concept that we talked about last week of future filling your roles versus backfilling your roles, looking and pulling ahead the future and making sure that as you identify replacements for your incumbents as part of your succession plans, that those replacements are identified in a future view, not in a current or past view. You don't want to replace plug and play. You want to replace with people that have attributes that are going to be compatible with where your company's going. Pull that future forward. So all the really great points here.
Absolutely, it makes our role much more strategic as well, because in most of the cases you have to anticipate and you have to be proactive when it comes to anticipating changes and future organizational objectives, and in a way filtering and pipelining leaders, not leaders of today, but leaders of tomorrow. So it makes us, again, stay much more closer to our clients and really think strategically, because you always have to align objectives with people and people with processes, and vice versa. So definitely very good points.
No, we never want to be viewed as a one and done either. We're very much in the relationship business and the trusted advisor, trusted partner business. And so the more we can do to add to our stack, add to our value proposition, the deeper those relationships are going to be, and the more we'll be fulfilling that trusted partner role.
Yeah, I want to throw something else out there. And this is just a thought. And I haven't watched the show in a few years, but I'm going to have any of you watched the show Billions?
On Showtime?
I think it was on Showtime. It was a hedge fund. Essentially, it was a hedge fund, fast-paced, crazy, a lot of sales guys in there. But they had an on-site psychiatrist. That the premise of this I thought was amazing, in the sense of we all go through times where we're down, we're out, we're just off our game. But to have the ability to walk into an office of someone who's on staff all the time, who knows every employee so well because over time they got to know them, who can, at a snap of a finger, so to speak, help them kind of recalibrate. I think it's a brilliant thing. I think it's something. I think it's something that every company should have, at the larger companies that can afford it. But from a psychologist standpoint, but also from people look at mental health, and whether it's mental health or however you want to phrase it. But somebody, I forget the gentleman's name who we had on that was doing about the breathing exercises.
Stephen Robinson.
Stephen Robinson, thank you. But somebody who can, if you had a psychologist and you had this, for your entire organization at their disposal, I think you'd get a tremendous amount of productivity out of your folks.
And Joe, I'll tell you, coming from a special operations background, about close to 10 years now, that is exactly what the highest level of special forces organizations has done. In every one of those units, they have a physical fitness coach, they have a nutritionist, they have a psychologist, they have working dogs, service dogs. All of those things are incorporated in there because they view the human being as the most important asset of the organization. And so you put all those things on staff. It is amazing. They have float tanks in the organization just to relieve the stress. All of those kind of things. And high-performing organizations, in order to change the dynamics, should absolutely start to look at those kind of scenarios. Because that is what's going to change the needle. Because if you have everybody, if it's all the same, if you have the same education, training experiences, peer organization, what's going to differentiate you? If you all of a sudden put that kind of staff together, guaranteed you're going to outperform your competition.
I couldn't agree more. And I love that. Yes, you're absolutely right. Without naming a company, one of my clients, and they're in the private equity space, but they have an on-site nutritionist, their gym on-site, but every single employee they hire has to go through nutrition assessment, a physical assessment, and they have tailor-made meals for them delivered every morning and for lunch, customized for their dietary needs, which I think is amazing. And to your point, Jim, I mean, you might have a great leader who has a tremendous vision, and maybe he comes up with a great product. Steve Jobs, doesn't matter. Elon Musk. But if you want your folks to produce at a different level than all your competition, to your point, why not give them the advantage?
Absolutely. When's the last time, from a leader's perspective, have you come in and asked your employees or your teammates, hey, how is your vitamin D and omega-3 intake? When's the last time you heard a leader say
Never.
that? Right. But if you take vitamin D and omega-3 together, it's called the happy pill combination, it defogs you. You think more clearly and faster. Your cognitive ability is instantly raised. All of those things. Why are we not talking about that from a leadership perspective? Right? Yeah, it's those kind of things.
Yeah, I gotta get on Amazon and order some now. Then I gotta get rid of my phone. Yeah, that's awesome stuff, and it's all about being proactive. And I think a big part of it is removing stigmas in corporate America or even global business. And there's always been this stigma about mental health, and it's only been in the last few years that mental health issues have actually come out in the open, and a lot of focus on depression and anxiety and some other things. And I'll date myself more than that Billion show, but I used to watch The Sopranos way back when, and Tony Soprano went to a psychiatrist, and in the mafia world, that was a big, big no-no in terms of, admitting weakness. And I think in corporate America, and I can't really speak for Europe, but I think in corporate America, corporate leaders admitting that they needed some type of psychiatric support was a sign of weakness, and there's just no way they were going there. But I think a lot of companies are a lot more open to that now, and they're being a lot more proactive about it.
Yeah. It's the right thing to do, I think.
Absolutely.
Yes, I would agree. It's an emerging trend also in Europe, even though these are practices which, they are more common now than 15 years ago. But again, you see that there's certain resilience in leaders, in just, assuming and accepting their weaknesses. And it's even more evident if you go to emerging countries, where the need for this strong thought transformation leadership is enormous. But countries like ex-CIS countries or South America, there it's where you see that you still have this bulletproof equipment, but essentially it's not bulletproof, because you just try to reject those basic things and focus on the big picture, while at the same time you're just in a way destroying your internal ecosystem, because human being is a combination of everything,
and the nice thing too,
start with the basics.
Absolutely. And it's all backed by advances in neuroscience now. Before it was kind of theoretical, and maybe people are just like, it's a holistic kind of thing, but the realities are the advances in neuroscience allows us to validate on almost all of these things that there is real change that happens when you do these certain type of practice steps and things like that. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I know it started obviously decades ago with putting fitness centers in companies to work on it that way, and that was kind of the tip of the iceberg with starting to worry about employee health. And then it kind of advanced to the food that was served in the canteens, cafeterias, and having healthy choices and identifying healthy meals and targeting calorie intake and things like that. And then they started layering in some of the mental health services. And I've seen things now with the amount of sunlight that goes into office areas. I've seen things with the color on the walls, the color of the carpets. Yep. All that type of thing is designed to create an environment that optimizes how an employee would feel about themselves. And now it's a matter of getting good leaders that can augment all of that can leverage all of that. And that concept of having digitally innovative and change inviting leaders, I think, is a pretty strong point and a way to get there.
Yeah.
Any other comments on that topic? And before we shift to our leadership roulette?
I'll add one more thing, Mike, that when we're talking about trends. One thing that I have seen since COVID is an uptick. This is within our own organization with clients, but I've seen an uptick in the clients themselves evaluating themselves also alongside with the candidates. So I think COVID has provided an opportunity for self-reflection on the current leadership team, the current HR organization within that. They've self-reflected that they need to understand more about themselves and who they're bringing on to complement them or how they would interact with them. So there's been an uptick in how we've had clients ask for assessments themselves to complement the understanding of what candidates that they're looking at to bring on. And I think that's a really interesting, and I totally support that. I think it's very important that the client organization understands just as much as what information we're trying to provide about the candidates for themselves.
I think it's incredibly important. We talked a week or two ago about personal pivots and the ability to look in the mirror and to be very honest with yourself when you look in the mirror. If you're going to make that personal pivot, you have to be real genuine and honest about who you are. And I think that applies to organizations. If organizations are going to transform their leadership team, if they're going to become more contemporary or even more futuristic, organizations have to have that ability to look in the mirror and be very honest with themselves and baseline where they are today. Incredibly important. That's a great point.
You bet. Awesome.
All right. Any thing you can pull out of your recent Iron Sharpens Iron movement podcast, Jim? Any of the guests you've talked to on there that you think apply to this topic? Any insights they may have given?
So Vera made a comment at the very opening here about it's not only important about how the leaders got to accept this agility change and be able to do that, but they also must be able to communicate it. She said they have to be able to communicate it. And this week's episode, there is a portion within the Iron Sharpens Iron movement that talks about the power of storytelling and how important it is for a leader to be able to tell a story, because this goes back to neuroscience about how humans actually are kind of wired to accept the storytelling, right? It goes back to caveman drawings and all of those kind of things. And so in order to, we can't just say we're going to hire a human being and they're going to change everything. They've got to be able to, change the vision, accept the future, and then articulate it to their team, right? About controlling the narrative, which we've told about before. So I think that's just going to be an interesting thing if people tune into it this week when we talk in that particular segment about the overall topic of this week's podcast is you need to think of your organization as a living organism. It's constantly changing. It's always morphing. It's doing those kind of things. And within that was to Vera's point about good leaders today have to be great storytellers.
When is it broadcast, Jim?
It went live this morning. So I'm sorry, is today Wednesday? It went live yesterday morning. It is live now. So yes, every Tuesday the new episodes come out. So the episode is live on the air right now. It should be the first one in when you go to any of the podcast hosts.
And people can download them if they want to listen at their convenience.
Yep.
Awesome.
There's another comment from Dr. Jacqueline.
Yeah, why don't you take that one, Joe?
She just said, what I have noticed during this period is that the leader who relied upon everything and everyone around them, there it is, on the screen now, but was not connected as he or she should have been, is floundering at this point. And I think that's what we were talking about earlier, which is 100% on point. It's just 100% on point. It's so true. If you're not up to speed, if you can't get up to speed, it's funny. I've had clients in the past, especially at the smaller middle market companies who are, what's the cloud? If you don't know what the cloud is by now, you're in trouble, right? Yeah. But Jacqueline or Dr. Jacqueline, it's a great point, and I think it can't be understated.
Yeah, I think a lot of leaders develop super good teams that are very competent. But then they tend to just sit back and watch and let the credits roll in, and those leaders in the long term are going to fail. The leaders that establish really good teams but stay highly connected to those teams, and they continue to enable the success of those teams, and don't just sit back and watch, are going to be the ones that are successful going forward, and they're going to drive more innovation and have a much happier team working for them. And everybody wants to be appreciated, number one, but they also want to know that their leader is involved, not micromanaging, but is involved and not just sitting back and watching things happen. And there's two types of people in the world. There's people that do stuff, and there's people that almost do stuff. And you always want to be that person that does stuff.
That's right.
The people that almost do stuff, ultimately fail. So I think that's a great point. Awesome point. All right, Jim, let's get to Leadership Roulette. Let's have a little bit of fun to wrap this up here. Where's your book?
Dun, dun. So, Mike, we actually hosted the inaugural episode of Leadership Roulette 2 weeks ago when you were out of town.
Yep.
And so I think the best thing that we can do this is the ground rules are basically simple. I'll flip through the book. You tell me when to stop. It's going to be random, and it'll have a leadership topic. And I'll read that topic, and then we'll just ask for all of us to make a comment if it's relative and all those kind of things. But since this is your first time, we'll make you do the first person to call to stop.
How many pages in the book?
There's 365.
So go to page 150.
Oh, boy, now you're going to make it difficult for me here. All right, going to page 150. If I can find 150. There's 150. Teachability. Teachability. If you are not attracting the leaders you desire, spend more time developing yourself. Do you want me to read that comment to you again? You
So
got it?
So if you're not, so is this from the view of a person who'd be working for a leader, or the view from a client who's hiring a leader?
This is your own self-reflection.
Okay.
As a
All
leader.
right. So if you're not attracting the leaders you desire, spend more time developing yourself. Teachability. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it fits. I think it goes back to what we talked about a couple weeks ago, where you kind of look at what got you where you are and what made you successful, and then you have to assess whether that's going to take you to the next level. So if you've reached that plateau where you've been successful and the leaders of your company are not flocking to you to bring you to that next rung up the ladder,
Yeah.
it's usually because you're not showing them what they want to see. You haven't learned the net new things you need to learn to make it to that next level. So I think it's very appropriate.
Awesome.
It's that part of that self-assessment type stuff. Yeah, that's a great way to word it. Actually, you've got to make yourself more attractive to that next generation of leaders, so they're going to want to mentor you and pull you up. So that's very appropriate.
I heard a quote once that always stuck with me. If you think you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I love your comments, Mike, because I think they are 100% relative to, well, from the leadership topic, right? You got to constantly be new. And if you aren't having people flock around you, you're not leading anymore. Just not.
No, and self-awareness is just so key, and ego is necessary to a point, because I think every executive has to have some element of what I call executive swagger.
Yep.
And I mean that in a very good way. But if your ego is to the point where you have that executive overconfidence or executive cockiness or whatever you want to call it, and you need to be that smartest person in the room to be successful, not a good thing. You always have to have that humbleness about you and that self-awareness to know that there's always a faster gun, there's always a faster draw, there's always a smarter person, et cetera, et cetera. And then being humble and self-aware, I think, makes incredibly successful leaders today. Always learning, too. You can never stop. I'm 59 years old, and every day I'm searching for something new that I don't know yet that I can play around with.
Yep.
All right, next. Who wants to call a stop?
Vera.
Okay.
Here we go.
Thank you. Stop.
Stopping. Listen with your heart. Choose to be an aggressive listener today. So let's talk about the power of listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, now that we get back to actually the assessment part and the model, the 43 competencies designed on the basis of the Big Five assessment. So listening is one of the key skills that we look at with leaders. And sometimes you get this question during the feedback session that I think that I score a little bit low on this or that specific competency, but as long as you have the listening component and the learning component present, it means that these are essential parts of the growth mindset, which can potentially lead you to improve all the missing elements, which can be related to coaching, to teamwork. So it's essentially a fundamental element which also contributes to a better team dynamics. It contributes, of course, to a client relationship negotiation, and it's definitely a point with which I cannot agree more. And what we say
so
here
Vera,
in France. Yeah, sorry.
Vera, you last week's episode, you brought up this word I think 10 different times, and it's the first thing that popped in my head when Jim said "listen with your heart," and that word's empathy. Yeah, I just think it's such an important part of listening and an important part of leadership today. And you had brought it up several times last week, so I just want to keep that back on the table.
Yes, exactly. What they say here is that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth.
Yeah, that's right.
Tell me why. Yes.
Yeah. I will tell you, it was many years in my professional life before I truly embraced active listening, right? I never realized how hard it was to actually listen to somebody. and be in the presence of that person in front of me, and not just kind of, think what my response was already going to be, or thinking 2 steps ahead of that conversation. It's actually, listening is a difficult competency to truly master, and it takes practice to switch yourself to be an active listener and have that true empathy and all of those kind of things.
Yeah, and I think social media and mobile devices have made it infinitely more difficult to actively listen.
Absolutely.
You always have those distractions.
Yep.
Yes, and especially the point of listening with the heart, because as you say, Jim, sometimes you can listen, but it's not technical listening when you have to just capture a question and take an answer which has been already prepared. So I think that this listening with the heart, when you really get into the problem and don't give. It's not about giving a spontaneous answer, but it's really about improving the fluency of a conversation, because it's not about asking questions and giving answers. Even if you have a client meeting and these things, you feel them even when you have a Zoom conversation. These things which just make it all more fluent and oriented.
I'm sorry, Dr. Jacqueline just made an excellent point where when you're listening to it with your heart, you're not necessarily listening to respond. That comes back to that empathy again. You're just listening to be there for somebody. That's a great point.
Yeah. And I think, it's kind of funny. You can even, in today's COVID world, Zoom etiquette, right? Zoom etiquette still has a human dynamic to it, to where, Vera, you're talking, I want to look at you in the screen. I want to feel like my eyes are in your eyes, kind of thing. And you see a lot of people, they're on the mount, they're listening to you, but they're looking at their side screen, they're typing, they're doing all other things, and you can see them, and they're not truly listening to you, and it's an interesting dynamic. I see it all the time in Zoom, and it drives me bonkers, because it should be no different. We are having a conversation right now, so let's have a conversation.
Right.
I just had a great idea. So, Dr. Jacqueline, I think we'd love to have you on our show. And if you'd like to be on the show one of the weeks, just message me on LinkedIn if that's of interest to you. I think you've got some great insights, and we'd like to have you be one of our guests if you're open to that. So you can message us. Thank you.
Great idea.
The first roulette guest invitation right there. You got people on there. Boom, be our guest.
Whose turn now, Joe?
Oh boy, here we go. I'm going to start this way.
Stop. I was trying to get page 150 again.
Initiative. As a leader, help your team to seize an opportunity today.
Help your team to seize an opportunity today.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's actually the question? No, I'm kidding. Well, I think it's very interesting, because I think, we've talked about this, I think, plenty of times. Well, first and foremost, I think it's the ability and the need and the want to empower your team versus wanting to do everything yourself. But I think if you're somebody who goes back to listening, if you're listening constantly, and you understand what your team wants to do, and you can direct them in line with what your company's initiatives and goals are, then you can empower them to do this. But I don't know that's, I guess my question, I'm going to flip back to you, is have you seen that being a real issue for leaders? Isn't that?
Well, I think when they bring this up, right, like, find an opportunity to seize that opportunity today, I think more than anything, it's a reflection on how can you create a win? How do you create a win today? Like if you get your team together and say, hey, let's accomplish this today, then it's a tangible thing, right? That you can see, like, you're taking them to that. You're creating an initiative even on a small scale. So I think the way that I interpret it is, it's really discussing how do you get these small wins, because it's about the wins to do that, or accomplish a task, or, seize the opportunity today. A good example is internally within our N2 Growth family, we have someone who has a birthday today. And as soon as I logged on to the computer this morning to our internal IM thing, it was filled with birthday wishes for that team member, right? And in a way, that's seizing the opportunity, because our culture has just said we're going to see everybody. We embrace them for who they are. We celebrate these small wins. It's somebody's birthday, and we're all celebrating it and all that. And I think if you're a leader that does that, you can eventually create a culture that way. And that's kind of a cool thing here at Enter Growth. I think that culture is already inculcated within us to seize the smallest opportunities every single day.
Yeah, I think the key words in there is initiative and opportunity. And a lot of companies are really good at talking. They talk about stuff. They talk about what they'd like to do someday. They talk about where they should be someday. And as a leader, you need to enable your team to have an instant bias towards action. You should never exit a meeting where ideas are generated without somebody taking ownership of that idea. It should never be open-ended. It should never be, this is a good idea, let's work on this. It should be, this is a great idea, who's going to work on this today? And the other big part is the word opportunity, and it's the ability of leaders to take challenges and to turn those challenges into opportunities. And we've been talking about this since day one with this COVID crisis, with the pivots. And how do you take a crisis and how do you turn that crisis into opportunities to transform your business, to do things in a different way, to grow in the midst of a pandemic? How do you leverage that? And you leverage that through initiative and a bias to instant action and enablement, enabling your team to go do that instant action. So I think it's a very appropriate comment.
Awesome.
Well done.
This has been a great episode.
One more for you. One more for you, Jim. I'll call stop for you.
All right.
You're flipping stop.
Okay. Fighting mediocrity. Remember that the best leader should be responsible for hiring other leaders. I like that. So, that is important. You want to never say that I'm the best. Or it goes back to if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, right? You want to be, to grow an organization, you don't grow followers, you grow leaders. You don't want to just create a whole bunch of followers. You want to find leaders that are out there that will then grow others also. You want to find people that are about this entire episode, storytellers, great resiliency, able to have a well-balanced personality or recognize what their weaknesses are and find somebody to counter it. All of those things. It is a leader's responsibility to find other leaders. Now you can grow that through followers, and almost every leader, obviously, right, comes from a follower beginning, no doubt about that. But I think in order to not be average, you have to go out there and find people better than yourself and have traits that are going to make the organization grow faster and better than you ever did in your own chair. And so that's how you avoid becoming a mediocre organization. Mediocre organizations just stay status quo, and they just want sheep. High-performing organizations are always looking for someone else that's going to push them to the next level.
Yeah, we actually engaged with a client a couple years ago, and we were presenting some incredible candidates to this client, and the CEO had delegated the COO as the person who would interview the inbound executive and kind of make the decisions. And after the second round of presenting candidates, it became obvious that the COO was not going to hire anybody that they thought was better than they were.
Wow.
And it was a very difficult situation because now we had to get to the CEO and say, hey, you guys are passing on a lot of great talent here, and here's what we think the issue is. And it did correct itself, but it was just so obvious that this person was not going to accept anybody that they felt was better than they were, and it's not a good situation. You always should be able to grab the best talent available and do what's best for the team.
That's right. Totally agree.
Very cool. Well, that's a great place to wrap it up. A good episode today, a lot of energy. I love this leadership. Love this leadership roulette. You may have to get a second book before we're done, Jim. But I think it's a great way to just kind of have a little bit of fun with this stuff and have some conversation. So just remind everybody that End of Growth is on every day. Not every day. It's on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Tuesday's the elephant in the room, Wednesday's the Prism, and Thursday's the director chair. Always some great conversation with a very diverse group of people and a lot of guest speakers. So hope you can join us on at least one, if not all three of the days. And it's great having you join us today. And hopefully we see you all next week. Take care. Hey, Vera,
Awesome.
stay on, Vera. Don't drop off.